The purpose of this PowerPoint is to help to prepare you and to help you review for the upcoming test regarding early American history and the presidents of this time period. This particular PowerPoint will focus on James Madison, his presidency, and the War of 1812 and its impact on the United States. Alright, so James Madison was elected as the 4th President of the United States. He was elected in 1808 and was later re-elected in 1812. Madison was well known before his election as president. He had been a congressman, he had been the vice president under Thomas Jefferson, and most notably, he was known as the father of the Constitution. Madison's primary focus upon receiving the presidency, or attaining the presidency, maybe a better term for it, was to continue Thomas Jefferson's agenda of limited government and maintaining American neutrality. The War of 1812 was the highlight of James Madison's presidency. A continued conflict between Great Britain and France began to threaten American neutrality. Issues that arose included the violation of American free trade and the impressment of American sailors. When we're talking about the violation of American free trade, what was happening is that Great Britain was attempting to put a stop to American trade with France, and France was attempting to limit American trade with Great Britain. So, despite their best efforts, the United States found themselves caught in the middle of this conflict. And the impressment of American sailors was really the hot button issue. British ships would stop American ships in the Atlantic Ocean, these trading vessels. They would board them, and if they suspected that some of the American crew members were actually British sailors who had defected, then they would force them to rejoin the British Navy. However, in many cases, these people were falsely imprisoned and falsely impressed and were forced to join the British Navy against their will. These issues led to the rise of war hawks in Congress, and these war hawks began to rally and call for war with Great Britain, primarily to defend American honor in these instances. As patriotism and pressure began to mount on James Madison and the government to take action, Madison asked Congress for a declaration of war against Great Britain in June of 1812. As it turned out, the United States was poorly prepared to fight a war in 1812. They had a small, poorly trained army and an equally small, poorly trained navy. This was due in large part to Jefferson and Madison's efforts to maintain a limited national government, and that made it really difficult to raise an army and a navy, or fund an army and a navy at the drop of a hat. Due to these issues, the war began very badly for the Americans. The British attacked and burned Washington, D.C., forcing the government to flee, and a siege was laid to Baltimore, and it was during this event that Francis Scott Key penned the Star-Spangled Banner. Even though the British were winning the war and were having a lot of success early in the war, they realized early on that it was going to be almost impossible to successfully fight two different countries, two different armies on two different continents at the same time. In fact, trying to do so was bankrupting the British Treasury. So they decided that they needed to focus on fighting Napoleon's army in Europe, and that they needed to reach a peace agreement with the United States quickly. In 1814, Britain and the U.S. agreed to sign the Treaty of Ghent. Before news of the treaty arrived in America, Americans under the command of Andrew Jackson actually won the biggest victory of the war against the British army that was garrisoned at New Orleans. You got to think, you're like, how could that happen? But you got to remember that this peace treaty was agreed to and it was reached across the Atlantic Ocean. So it took more than a month for news to get back to the United States that peace had been reached. And then it took even longer for news of that peace to reach across the country. So the biggest victory of the war and the birth of a national hero actually came after the war was over. The Treaty of Ghent was successful in ending the war, but it didn't address some of the primary issues that led to the war. These were things like trade rights and just America's right to neutrality, America's right to conduct its own business without being considered Great Britain's little brother. The end of the War of 1812 led to an era that came to be known as the era of good feelings in the United States. This period was called the era of good feelings due to the election of a popular president and the power of the U.S. economy during this period. It led to a prosperous time for almost all Americans, and really helped Americans to feel a sense of nationalism, a sense of national pride swept across the United States for the first time since the American Revolution's conclusion, and a feeling that America was no longer the little brother to Great Britain, that they had for the second time defeated Great Britain, and that they should now be considered a legitimate power in the world. Hopefully this presentation has helped you to review. Go back, make sure you have good notes on the election of James Madison, his resume leading up to his election as president, and the causes leading up to the War of 1812, as well as the Treaty of Ghent. All right, best of luck.